In the quiet rural landscapes of Fulton County, Ohio, a chilling mystery unfolded. A young woman, Sierah Joughin, vanished without a trace, leaving behind a trail of haunting clues. What happened to Sierah? And how did a seemingly ordinary man named James Worley become the center of this horrifying tale? Buckle up as we delve into a story that's as unsettling as it is tragic. It was a warm summer day, the kind that invites you to embrace the outdoors, to feel the sun on your skin and the wind in your hair. The date was July 19, 2016. A day that started like any other but would end in a way no one could have ever predicted. Meet Sierah Joughin, a radiant 20-year-old with a zest for life. A student at the University of Toledo, Sierah had dreams, aspirations, and people who loved her. She was the kind of person who could light up a room just by walking into it. On this particular day, Sierah decided to go on a bike ride. Not alone, but with Josh Kolasinski, her boyfriend of 7 years. The couple chose the scenic rural roads of Fulton County, west of Toledo, for their ride. Little did they know, this seemingly innocent decision would set the stage for a series of events that would shatter lives and leave a community in mourning. Josh, riding his motorcycle, and Sierah, on her purple bike, stayed close together as they navigated the winding roads and cornfields. They shared laughs, took Snapchat videos, and enjoyed the freedom that only a bike ride on a beautiful day can offer. But as they reached a certain point on County Road 6, they decided to part ways. Josh lived in a different direction, and so, with a kiss and a promise to text later, they said their goodbyes. It was around 6:45 p.m. The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows on the road. Josh rode off, unaware that this would be the last time he would ever see Sierah alive. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows over the quaint town of Metamora, Ohio, an unsettling silence enveloped the Joughin household. Sierah's bedroom light, usually a warm beacon through the night, was conspicuously off. Her mother, Sheila Vakulik, felt a knot tighten in her stomach as she glanced at the clock. It was already past 10:30 p.m., and the house was filled with an eerie quietude that was hard to ignore. Sheila picked up her phone, her fingers trembling as she dialed Josh's number. "Is Sierah with you?" she asked, her voice tinged with a desperation she couldn't hide. Josh's reply was like a punch to the gut. "I thought she was home," he said, his voice laced with concern. "I've been texting her, but there's no reply. Her phone goes straight to voicemail." The atmosphere in the room grew thick with tension. Sheila's heart raced as she dialed Sierah's number, only to be met with the cold, mechanical voice of the voicemail service. It was as if Sierah had vanished into thin air, her phone now a lifeless object that refused to ring. Sheila's mind raced through a million scenarios. Had Sierah met with an accident? Was she in trouble? The questions were endless, but answers were scarce. With a sense of dread that she couldn't shake off, Sheila picked up the phone again, this time to report her daughter missing. As the clock on the wall ticked away, each second stretching into an eternity, the Vakulik family faced an agonizing wait. Time, they knew, was of the essence. And as the minutes turned into hours, the grim reality began to set in. Sierah Joughin had disappeared, and every moment that passed could mean the difference between life and death. The moment the local police received the call, the atmosphere at the station became electric. Officers who were casually sipping coffee or filling out paperwork suddenly sprang into action. Detective Sarah Williams, a seasoned investigator with a reputation for solving complex cases, took charge. "We have a missing person, Sierah Joughin, 20 years old. Time is of the essence," she announced, her eyes scanning the room, locking onto each officer's gaze as if to transfer her own urgency. Within minutes, patrol cars were dispatched, and the search for Sierah began in earnest. The first clue came in the form of a Snapchat video, discovered on a friend's phone. In it, Sierah was seen laughing and riding her bike, the wind playfully tossing her hair. The timestamp indicated that it was taken just hours before she vanished. It was a haunting glimpse into a life interrupted, a chilling contrast to the dire situation at hand. Next, officers found Sierra's Fitbit watch near a local trail. The digital footprints it provided were like breadcrumbs in a dark forest, leading investigators to a cornfield. The sight that met them there was deeply unsettling. The corn stalks were trampled, as if a struggle had taken place. Sarah Williams felt her stomach churn. "Something happened here, something bad," she muttered under her breath, her eyes narrowing as she surveyed the scene. As the team collected evidence, the puzzle pieces began to align, but the picture they formed was far from complete. Sierah was still missing, and the clues, though significant, were like fragments of a shattered mirror, reflecting only pieces of the truth. The police worked tirelessly, their faces etched with the weight of the responsibility they carried. Each clue unearthed, each lead followed, brought with it a mix of hope and despair. Hope that Sierah would be found, and despair at the thought of what might have befallen her. As night turned into day, and then back into night, the investigation intensified. Search dogs were brought in, helicopters scoured the area from above, and volunteers joined the police in combing through every inch of the town. Yet, despite their best efforts, Sierra remained elusive. The clock continued to tick, each second a heavy drumbeat in the hearts of those who loved her. James Worley was a name that few in the community knew, but those who did found him to be an enigma. A man in his late 50s, with graying hair and a weathered face, he ran a small engine repair shop out of his home. On the surface, he seemed like just another local, but Detective Sarah Williams sensed something was off the moment she laid eyes on him. You can't be in this line of work for long without developing a gut feeling about people, she thought, her eyes meeting Worley's as he was brought in for questioning. His alibi for the night of Sierra's disappearance was shaky at best. He claimed to have been working late in his shop, but couldn't produce any evidence to substantiate his story. I keep to myself, don't really check the clock, he said, his voice tinged with a nervous energy that didn't go unnoticed. Sarah Williams leaned in, her eyes never leaving his. People who have nothing to hide nothing, she said, echoing a mantra she had learned early in her career. The decision was made to search Worley's property, and what the police found there was nothing short of chilling. Hidden behind a stack of old car parts and machinery were items that no one could have expected. Women's clothing, duct tape, and a collection of journals filled with disturbing entries. But the most damning evidence was found buried deep in a makeshift shed, a set of restraints and a freezer, empty but for the lingering smell of decay. As Sarah Williams stood there, taking in the grim scene, she felt a mixture of relief and horror. Relief because they had found the missing pieces that would likely solve the case, and horror at the realization of what Sierra might have endured. "We've got him," she whispered, her voice tinged with both triumph and sorrow. But at what cost? The dark secrets uncovered on Worley's property were the unraveling threads of a tapestry of terror. It was as if the walls of his home were screaming the truth, filling in the gaps of a story that no one wanted to hear but needed to be told. James Worley was arrested and taken into custody, his face a mask of disbelief and defeat. As he was led away, the gravity of what had been discovered weighed heavily on everyone involved. The case was coming together, but the soul of the community felt like it had been torn apart. And so, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows that seemed to swallow the town whole, one thing was clear: the search for Sierra may have led to James Worley, but the journey to justice was far from over. As the police tape unfurled around James Worley's property, a sense of dread settled over the investigators. They had seen their share of dark human secrets, but nothing could prepare them for what they found in one of the barns, a structure that stood apart, shrouded in an eerie silence. The barn door creaked open, its rusty hinges wailing like a banshee, as if warning the officers of the horrors that lay within. The air inside was stale, thick with the smell of rust and something far more sinister. Detective Sarah Williams switched on her flashlight, its beam cutting through the darkness to reveal a scene that would haunt her for the rest of her life: a makeshift dungeon. Chains dangled from the ceiling, restraints were bolted to the walls, and zip ties were scattered across a wooden table like some macabre art installation. But it was the freezer that drew her attention, standing ominously in the corner, its lid slightly ajar. As she lifted the freezer lid, her heart pounding in her chest, she was met with a sight that confirmed her worst fears: traces of what looked like blood, still fresh. This is it, she thought, her mind racing. This is where he planned to keep her, to do God knows what. The room felt like it was closing in on her, each piece of evidence screaming its own terrible story, piling up in a crescendo of horror that was almost too much to bear. Officer Mike Johnson, who had been on the force for over a decade, stood at the entrance of the barn, his face ashen. "I've seen some things in my time, but this is something else," he muttered, his voice barely above a whisper. Sarah nodded, her eyes meeting his. They both knew that they had crossed a threshold, that their lives and the life of their community would never be the same again. As they exited the barn, the weight of what they had discovered was palpable, hanging in the air like a dark cloud. The evidence was piling up, each item a damning testament to the twisted mind of James Worley. And yet, as they stood there, amidst the chaos of the crime scene, a chilling question echoed in their minds: how many more are there? How many more Sierras could there have been? The makeshift dungeon was the irrefutable proof they needed. But it was also a mirror reflecting the darkest corners of the human soul. It was a place where nightmares were born, and where innocence came to die. And as they sealed off the area, marking it as the epicenter of an evil that had been unearthed, they knew that the road to justice was still fraught with challenges, each more daunting than the last. The courtroom was a cauldron of tension as prosecutor Emily Thompson rose to present the forensic evidence. Her eyes scanned the room, locking onto James Worley, who sat there with an unsettling calmness. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," she began, her voice steady but tinged with a gravity that everyone could feel, "what you're about to hear will not only shock you but will also remove any shadow of a doubt about the guilt of the accused." First on the docket was the DNA evidence. Forensic expert Dr. Alan Harris took the stand, his hands slightly trembling as he held up a sealed plastic bag. Inside were the zip ties found in the makeshift dungeon. Now a critical piece of evidence. "We found traces of Sierah Joughin's DNA on these restraints," he declared, his voice echoing in the courtroom. A collective gasp filled the air. The implications were horrifying, and the room seemed to darken at the revelation. Next came the cell phone location data. Detective Mark Lewis displayed a map on a large screen, pinpointing the movements of both Sierra and James on that fateful night. As you can see, he explained, pointing to a series of red dots that converged at the location of the barn. Their paths intersected right here, at the very place where we discovered the dungeon. The room was silent, the gravity of the evidence sinking in. But it was the search history that sent chills down everyone's spine. The defendant's computer showed searches for terms like soundproofing a room, quick-acting sedatives, and how to dispose of a body. Emily continued, her eyes never leaving James. His face remained impassive, but the room could feel the walls closing in on him. As Emily sat down, she looked at the jury, their faces a mix of horror and disbelief. We have DNA linking Sierra to the restraints. We have cell phone data placing both of them at the scene. And we have a search history that paints a terrifying picture of premeditation, she summarized, her voice heavy with the weight of the evidence. If this isn't enough to convict, then what is? The room was thick with emotion, each piece of evidence like a hammer blow to the wall of James Worley's defense. As the prosecution rested its case, the atmosphere was electric, charged with the collective desire for justice. But amidst the damning evidence and the emotional turmoil, a haunting question lingered: would it be enough? Would it be enough to bring justice for Sierra and closure for her family? The forensic evidence had spoken, but now it was up to the jury to listen. And as they filed out of the courtroom to deliberate, everyone knew that the scales of justice were teetering, loaded with the irrefutable facts of a case that had shaken the community to its core. The courtroom was a theater of raw emotion and palpable tension. The wooden benches were filled to capacity, a sea of faces, some hopeful, some skeptical, but all expectant. The air was thick, each breath a labor, as if the room itself was holding its collective breath. Judge Martin Thompson took his seat, his gavel poised like the sword of Damocles, ready to cut through the tension and deliver the final act of this tragic drama. Defense attorney Robert Davis rose to make his case for James Worley. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice tinged with a desperate urgency, "we've heard a lot of damning evidence, but evidence can be misleading. My client is a simple man, a mechanic, not a monster." He went on to question the reliability of the DNA evidence, hinting at possible contamination. He even brought up James's alibi, a shaky story about a late-night repair job, as if it could somehow counterbalance the mountain of evidence against him. But as he spoke, the room felt unconvinced. The eyes of the jury flickered between Davis and the prosecution table, where prosecutor Emily Thompson sat, her gaze unwavering, her case seemingly bulletproof. It was as if the room was a scale, and the defense's arguments were but feathers against the crushing weight of the prosecution's evidence. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the jury was dismissed for deliberation. The clock on the courtroom wall ticked agonizingly slow, each second stretching into a minute, each minute into an hour. 6 hours passed, but it felt like a lifetime. The door to the jury room finally swung open, and the jurors filed back into their seats, their faces inscrutable, their verdict sealed in a simple envelope. Judge Thompson cleared his throat, the sound reverberating through the room like a thunderclap. "Has the jury reached a verdict?" he asked, his voice betraying no emotion. The jury foreman stood up, his hand trembling as he handed the envelope to the bailiff, who then passed it to the judge. The room was so quiet you could hear a pin drop. Judge Thompson opened the envelope and read the verdict, his voice steady but laden with the gravity of the moment. "In the case of the state versus James Worley, the jury finds the defendant." The pause was unbearable, a chasm of silence that seemed to stretch into infinity. And then, like a dam breaking, the words came, "Guilty." A wave of emotion swept through the courtroom. Tears flowed freely. Hugs were exchanged, and a sense of relief, tinged with the sorrow of what had been lost, filled the air. Justice had been served, but at a cost that no verdict could ever truly compensate. As James Worley was led away, his face a mask of disbelief and defeat, the room exhaled a sigh of collective relief. But amidst the jubilation, the eyes of Sierra's family told a different story, a story of a void that could never be filled, of a wound that would never fully heal. The trial was over, but their journey was far from complete. In the courtroom, as the judge read out the sentence, "Death for James Worley," the air was thick with a mix of relief and sorrow. Justice had been served, but at an unimaginable cost. Sierra's family, friends, and the community had been through an emotional wringer, and the verdict, as final as it was, couldn't bring back what was irrevocably lost. But Sierra's story was far from over. It had ignited a spark that led to real change. Ohio Senate Bill 231, commonly known as Sierra's Law, was introduced. The bill aimed to establish a violent offender database, a proactive measure designed to prevent future tragedies. The legislative journey was arduous, filled with debates and revisions, but the memory of Sierra served as a rallying point. Her mother, Sheila, became an advocate, her voice unwavering as she pushed for the bill's passage. And when the governor finally signed it into law, it was a bittersweet moment, a triumph overshadowed by the reason for its existence. The law was a step forward, but it also served as a sobering reminder. It was a commitment from the community and the state to do better, to protect its citizens and ensure that no other family would have to endure the pain that Sierra's had. As the ink dried on Ohio Senate Bill 231, the community took a collective breath. It was a moment to reflect, to remember, and to honor the life of Sierah Joughin, a life full of promise, cut tragically short. In the days that followed, vigils were held, and memorials sprang up around the town. Photos of Sierra, smiling, vibrant, full of life, were displayed alongside candles and flowers. Her favorite song played softly in the background, filling the air with a haunting beauty that seemed to capture the essence of her spirit. Her story became a cautionary tale, a chilling reminder of the dangers that can lurk even in the most unexpected places. But it was also an inspiration, a call to action. Schools started self-defense classes. Parents had difficult but necessary conversations with their children, and communities banded together to look out for one another. Sierra's impact was felt not just in the law that bore her name, but in the everyday actions of people who had been touched by her story. Her legacy lived on in the kindness shown to strangers, in the extra precautions taken, and in the love shared among families and friends. As years passed, the physical memorials might fade, but Sierra's memory remained indelible. She became a symbol of both vulnerability and strength, a reminder of the fragility of life and the importance of cherishing every moment. And in that enduring memory, Sierah Joughin was immortalized, not as a victim, but as a catalyst for change, as a beacon of awareness, and most importantly, as a beloved daughter, friend, and community member whose life, though short, left an indelible mark on the world. Thank you for joining me on this harrowing journey. If you found this story as gripping as I did, please like, share, and subscribe for more true crime stories. Until next time, stay safe.